Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this month's edition of the .bank webinar, Activating Your .bank domain name. The next steps once you have secured and verified your .bank domain. I'd like to remind you that a version of these slides can be found and downloaded at encirca.com/ICBA. Following the webinar, you'll be able to find a recorded version of this webinar at the same website. And now I'd like to introduce you to our presenters today. First, we have Viveka Ware, ICBA Executive Vice President, responsible for regulatory policy for the ICBA, and a board member of the FTLD Registry. Then we have Rob Holmes, Return Path General Manager, responsible for email fraud protection services, previously at leading service providers in the DNS and brand protection industry. And then finally, we have Thomas Barrett, INCIRCA President. INCIRCA is the sole registrar serving on .bank Security Requirements Working Group. It was founded in 2001 in Boston, Massachusetts. This is what our agenda will look like today. We'll start off with why you should move to .bank. We'll go into DMARC and how it relates to .bank. And then finally, .bank migration strategies. Throughout the webinar, if you do have any questions, please enter them into the question box in your GoToWebinar widget. And now I'd like to hand it over to Viveka Ware.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and for your ongoing support of ICBA. We're thrilled about the community banking industry's participation in the .bank domain. Thank you very much. ICBA is a strong advocate of the financial services industry having a more secure channel to conduct online financial transactions. We actually think that there's a real advantage to having a more secure channel, particularly as you see more and more non-bank technology-based applications trying to infringe in our space. Serving as a founder, investor, and endorser of FTLD Registry, the registry operator for .bank and .insurance, is another aspect of our advocacy. And with the interest of community banks first and foremost, ICBA decided to establish an alliance with the registrar to ensure community banks receive the information, the service, and the support they need to prosper in this new and dynamic environment. And we're very pleased to be working with INCIRCA. We're continuing our relationship with INCIRCA with a new focus on getting all of these .banks activated. So be sure to visit www.incirca.com/ICBA for the latest information and resources. Now, before we really get into today's program, I want to give a brief snapshot of the latest .bank statistics. There are approximately almost 6,000, or to be more exact, 5,900 .bank applications. We think this is just phenomenal. Approximately 81% of the applications have been verified, and the approval rate is approximately 98%. These are extremely strong verification and approval metrics. Now, there are two verification issues that FTLD Registry and its partners are encountering. First, it's taking considerably longer than anticipated to verify the employment and authority of the individual completing the .bank application. So it would really be helpful if your application has not yet been verified and approved. Make sure that you alert the appropriate people in your bank to that the person signing the application needs to go through this verification process so that it can be expedited. The other issue has to do with the treatment of bank holding companies. Currently, bank holding companies are ineligible to register domain names in .bank. However, recognizing the complex legal framework that exists in the financial services sector, and particularly between a bank holding company and their subsidiary banks, FTLD does allow an eligible bank to register domain names for its bank holding company parent. However, this bank holding company parent domain name cannot be used on the internet. So basically you can do that. You can actually purchase a .bank domain name for defensive reasons or brand protection, but you cannot use it to conduct business on the internet. So it does take some time to go through the nuances related to these the bank holding company registrations. So most of the time when FTLD does contact the registrant, they do decide to go ahead and proceed as a defensive registration. But keep in mind, this could be costly, particularly for a smaller bank. Okay, so now we know that there are thousands of .bank domains that are verified and ready to go. So now we need to remind you why you should move to .bank. Keep in mind, the vision was not just for the banks to go ahead and apply for the .bank domain and just take a passive approach. The vision really involves you getting those domains activated so that you can conduct business with your customers. Keep in mind that .bank was created by the banks for banks, and it's owned and operated by the financial services community, and it's a trusted, verified, and more secure online location for banking services due to FTLD Registry's design, policies, and enhanced security requirements. .bank also addresses the root causes of online banking fraud. It reduces the risk, incidence, and scope of phishing and spoofing. It also eliminates cyber squatting due to the requirement that domains must correspond to legal names. This structure well positions FTLD Registry to proactively implement strategies in the best interest of the industry and its customers. .bank establishes a solid foundation on which a bank can securely communicate with customers, stakeholders, and regulators once it's activated. So I also want to talk about why the .bank domain is so expensive, because we've gotten questions over the past few months inquiring, why can't someone use GoDaddy? Why is .bank so more expensive than a .com domain? And FTLD's operations are far more expensive than most new and existing Internet registry operators. For example, the verification process undertaken to ensure that only legitimate banks are awarded domains names is a costly and time-consuming process. FTLD has several technical partners. For an example, the technical services provider is responsible for ensuring compliance with some of the enhanced security requirements, and there are extra costs associated with their role. Another third-party service provider is responsible for monitoring any abusive use of .bank domains, such as spam, malware, and compliance with banks with the enhanced security requirements. .bank domain names can only be registered at the approved registrars that agree to adopt the security standards required by FTLD Registry. Adoption requires significant effort and expense, which is why there are a limited number of registrars. Consequently, a $1,000 .bank domain is not simply replacing a $30 .com domain. Okay, let's move to the next slide. FTLD has developed a resource leveraging your .bank domain to assist you in leveraging your .bank domain, and you see that it is available at the website address posted. And basically it covers communications, security requirements for executives, and then the security requirements for the technologists in your respective organizations. FTLD is also in the process of developing some additional resources that will be offered in the not-so-distant future. And keep in mind that from a technology perspective, your domain will not resolve, or in other words, not work until it has been verified and set up correctly. And also TLS and SSL is required even for web forwarding to a non.bank web page. DMARC alignment is required before you send out email using .bank. Now you're going to hear more about these key security requirements in just a few minutes. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Rob.
Thank you so much, Viveka. As Viveka described, .bank, the community has got together and created this secure environment in the digital world in .bank. And Tom a little later is going to talk about the DNS and web elements that will make for that secure environment. But we all know that a key consideration in protecting banks online is protecting the email channel. Email is great for business, but it's also vulnerable. And DMARC really seeks to eliminate and prevent those vulnerabilities being exploited. So Andrew, if you could move to the next slide, I'll just give a simple illustration of what DMARC is about. So on the left, you can see an email that looks as though it has come from First Citizens Bank, and I've zoomed in on the email address, which is an email address at firstcitizensonline.com. Now, if you were to do a whois lookup for that domain, you would see that that domain is owned by First Citizens Bank. But that is a phishing URL taking end users to the fraudulent site on the right-hand side of your page. So you might say, how can that be? How can a third party pretend to be firstcitizensonline.com? And the answer to that is because email, when it was first designed back in the first SMTP protocol, it was not designed with security in mind. There is an inherent flaw or vulnerability in email such that anyone can pretend to be anyone. And that's what we call spoofing, email spoofing. So what does DMARC do? It prevents this happening. So DMARC will ultimately negate any of these types of threats. So if we move on to the next slide, Andrew, and we'll just kind of give you a little definition. Since we're talking about DMARC, you ought to be aware of what DMARC stands for. So DMARC stands for Domain-Based Message Authentication, Reporting, and Conformance, which is a mouthful. So let me give you a few pointers. Let's start at the middle of that. The message authentication. It is an authentication process that authenticates that the sender, First Citizens Online, truly is who they say they are. And they do that authentication, DMARC does that authentication based on the sending domain, hence the domain-based message authentication. Now the reporting and conformance is a little dry. The reporting is great actually. It gives banks great visibility into mail streams, activities across your mail streams, both the legitimate email and also the fraudulent email. And I really won't bore you with what conformance means. So that's what DMARC is. Whilst it may be new to you, it actually has been in production for over 3.5 years now. It was founded in February 2002, officially launched. In fact, it was in production before then. And the important thing for you to be aware of is that you are joining some real internet pioneers in security. So by signing up with DMARC, you're joining the likes of Bank of America and Wells Fargo and Google, all of whom serve to create this secure environment for email. And indeed, ReturnPath was a part of that consortium who designed DMARC. So really it affords you two advantages. As an owner of a domain, it provides you, first of all, control over who can and who cannot send email from your domain. So what does that mean? It means that you can block domain-based spoofing. That email that I showed you on the previous slide, because it came from a .bank domain that you owned, DMARC will enable you to block those emails. You don't actually have to block them yourselves. It's actually issuing an instruction to receivers of email, Gmail and Yahoo and Hotmail, that if they receive an email that fails DMARC, they should block it. So it gives you control and protection of your digital assets. The second thing it gives you is intelligence or information. And that really is who is sending email and how many emails were sent from what IP address. And that's very valuable for a couple of reasons. But I won't go into those details right now. So DMARC is great. Yeah, you can roll forward, actually, Andrew. DMARC is great because it really empowers you. By implementing DMARC, you are it's done via a record in the DNS that Tom's going to talk a little bit about later. So it's not on a transactional basis, it's at a policy level that you announce to the world that if anyone sees email coming from my sending domain, my .bank domain, you can actually tell Gmail and Yahoo and Hotmail and AOL what they should do with that email. And that what they should do is expressed in a DMARC policy. And there are three settings, three possibilities of the DMARC policy: none, quarantine, and reject. Now, in its most severest form, the DMARC policy says, if you receive an email that came from my .bank domain and it wasn't me, block it. Don't even put it in spam. And that's ultimately where we want to be, because then you won't have a phishing problem. Now, a slightly softer policy is quarantine. And it says to Gmail, hey, if you receive an email from my .bank domain that fails DMARC and wasn't actually sent by me, then put it in spam. And the softest of all policies is none. And that is, you know what? I'm not going to tell you to put it in spam. I'm not even going to tell you to block it. Do what you would with it, but let me know. Report on it. So you might ask, why do we have that policy? Why wouldn't you just block everything all the time that fails DMARC? And the reason for it is as follows. Even legitimate email that fails DMARC will get blocked. Now, I'm not going to get technical about this, but DMARC is an authentication-based standard, and we need to make sure that your legitimate email passes the DMARC authentication standard. Because if your legitimate email does not, then it will fall foul of the DMARC policy. So, for example, many of you will have third parties sending email for you. And if that third party is not authenticating their email correctly using your .bank, then that email may get blocked. So that's the reason why we have these three policies, is because when we migrate to .bank, before we are absolutely certain that our legitimate email will pass DMARC, we are going to roll the policy back from reject to none. In actual fact, that preempts the next slide, where we actually talk about the FTLD requirements. So if we could roll on, Andrew. So I won't read all of this. I'll read the first and last bullets. So this is actually coming from the FTLD security requirements for .bank. So as a registrant of .bank, you must comply with these requirements. And the first is that you, the registrant, must publish a valid DMARC record with a policy of either quarantine or reject by default. And Tom will go into some details a little later as to how Encirca is going to enable you to do that. Really simple. The final bullet there is that when deploying DMARC, or I might say when migrating your email to your .bank domain, you may temporarily use a policy of none during the implementation phase, whilst you tune up the authentication of your legitimate email. Okay, thereby, making sure that your legitimate email doesn't get blocked. Okay, thanks, Andrew. If we could move to the next slide, please. I'm just going to kind of wrap up on the benefits, just to wrap up on the benefits of
Actually, Rob, we received a question. Could you please clarify the difference between DMARC and SPF?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. Okay, so there are various authentication protocols in email. There is SPF, there is DKIM, which is actually listed on this slide as well, and then finally there's DMARC. First of all, what is SPF? SPF is essentially a whitelist of IP addresses that are allowed to send email on behalf of you, on behalf of your .bank domain. That's what SPF is. So it's a list of IP addresses. But SPF really, when an email is sent, I'm going to try and not to get too technical. When an email is sent, there are two elements to an email. There is the envelope of the email, and that is the first thing that a receiver like Gmail will see. A mailbox provider will see the envelope, and they'll see it came from this IP address, and it'll see an envelope address, and it will validate SPF against that envelope address, and that's SPF. But then when they actually deliver the email, they essentially take the email out of the envelope and put it into the appropriate person's inbox. And when you read an email in your inbox, you actually see a different email address. You see what we call the email header address inside the envelope, and it's a different field. What DMARC does, and which is where the word alignment comes from, DMARC alignment is when we pass SPF, so the envelope address came from an IP address that is allowed to send for your .bank, and when we look inside the message, the email header came from the same address. So only DMARC will prevent the visible from, the header from on the email being spoofed, whereas SPF validates the envelope address and makes sure that the sending IP is allowed to send on behalf of that domain. I'm sorry that I got a little technical, but hopefully that was clear.
That was great. Thank you.
No problem. So I think if there aren't any other questions at this point, Andrew, if we could roll on to, I think this is really just me wrapping up now. So DMARC is great because it gives teeth to security in email for .bank. Without DMARC, we would still have phishing in .bank because third parties could pretend to be you in .bank. They could spoof your .bank domain. DMARC ensures that all those emails coming from those spoofed addresses are blocked. And that's me. So I'm going to hand back, I think we'll hand over to Tom.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Viveka. I'll just pause here, remind you folks, we know that was a very technical section, and so we have a mixed audience today, so if you do have any questions. questions, feel free to put
Tom,
them into
just
the
a second.
webinar.
Your microphone is coming in very staticky.
Okay. Well, that's unusual. Is this any better?
No, it is not.
Oh, now is this better?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, Andrew, maybe I can dial in, and maybe you'll have to take over for me then. I can join later.
Okay. While we wait for Tom to dial in, I do have a few more questions on DMARC that came in. Perhaps, Rob, if you could handle those.
Sure.
First one is asking if DMARC helps protect against IP spoofing.
Sorry, if DMARC protects against what?
Against IP spoofing.
No, it does not. It's specifically domain spoofing. IP spoofing is technically possible. It is rare. At the risk of somebody who really knows their stuff kind of coming back with a statistic on that, IP spoofing is very, very difficult. It's technically very, very difficult and is not prevalent in the majority of phishing attacks. So, but no, DMARC would not address IP spoofing. But there are other mechanisms, I believe, in .bank that would prevent it.
Okay, and you mentioned that the recipients of each email will check the DMARC record or the SPF record. How do they go about checking it?
Yeah, and when I say the recipient, I do not mean the individual whose mailbox receives the email. So I don't mean the people in the to from. I mean the mailbox providers. I mean the Gmails and Yahoo mails and Outlook, Hotmail and AOLs of the world. How do they do it? Well, they receive an email. They inspect the envelope of the email, and they'll check that it came from a whitelisted IP address for that domain. They will then open the email and check for what are called DKIM signatures. They'll inspect certain elements of the email to check its authenticity. And then it'll, having verified its authenticity, it'll then determine whether or not it should deliver it based on reputation and content. But it's all completely transparent to the recipient and happens very, very fast. It's interesting because most people assume that when you click send on an email, it just gets delivered. That's it. It's done. There are actually many, many steps that every email has to go through in order to get delivered. I hope that's sufficiently clear and high level.
Yep, absolutely. Do you also have a sense on how widely adopted DMARC is?
Yeah, yes, I do. Pretty much all of the top banks in the United States of America have adopted it. And I think it's something like 90% of all email that Gmail receives is actually authenticated with DMARC. Now, obviously, there's some skew there because of the fact that a small number of senders account for the vast majority of email sent in the world. But no, there's very good adoption, definitely in the financial institution industry, and also in payment services, travel, and also government. So many, many industries. It's well established, as I say, 3.5 years old.
Okay, and you're mentioning large webmail providers. What about smaller servers, such as internal Exchange servers?
Yeah, so on the inbound, there's some lag in terms of adoption. So Dell SonicWall supports DMARC, so an email that is received and hits the Dell SonicWall kind of filtering layer, that will get authenticated using DMARC. The latest version of Cisco does, and Proofpoint, but there is still some lag on what I'm going to describe as the inbound filter. That's to say, emails coming into the bank rather than DMARC, which is kind of adopted by Gmail and Yahoo and AOL. That's really kind of protection of the consumer. And I would, being candid, say most of the value of DMARC today is in protecting consumers from consumer email fraud rather than protecting employees from spear phishing and other types of email fraud.
Okay, thank you. And one last question before we check in on Tom. For a bank that hosts their own email servers, how would they confirm that they can support DMARC? For example, we have one bank that uses Cisco IronPoint. And I just want to clarify as well that DMARC is required to use email with a .bank domain name. So let's check in on Tom and see if he's fixed the mic problem.
Yeah, I'm here, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. You sound much better now.
So, actually, if you mute me on the webinar tool, it might sound better, Andrew, as I've dialed in now. Are you still hearing an echo? Okay, maybe that's better. So just to answer your last question, if you are, I believe we may have lost Rob, but if you're using an internal mail server, the way you would use DMARC is actually a record set on your DNS name server. It's a TXT record. And so you can certainly use an internal email server with DMARC. That's not a problem. As Rob said earlier, you either use SPF or DKIM. The SPF method is purely done within your DNS name server and does not require you to do anything within your email server. DKIM does require you to do something in both. And so, again, Encirca can work with you, or if you're using some other registrar, they should be able to help you out there as well. Are there any other questions, Andrew, you want to go through, or should I proceed?
No, by all means, feel free to proceed.
All right. And just to do a quick checkpoint, we have, as Viveka said earlier, there's been about 5,900 .bank registrations since the launch of .bank. There are about 20 resellers like Encirca selling .bank, and they do not include folks like GoDaddy or Network Solutions because of the extra work required by the registrars in order to support .bank. Encirca has been lucky enough to capture about 50% of the .bank registrations. So that's been quite a blessing for us, but also it means that we're handling the lion's share of the work in terms of activating these .bank domain names. So I'm going to give you an idea of where we are today. Most of our customers have completed the verification process for their .bank domain name. We still have a few hundred that have not. And if you're in that small group, it is vital that you complete that process. You should have received a fairly urgent email from Encirca, because some of you will have your names deleted next week if you don't complete that process. So by all means, if you have not heard from Symantec yet, we do urge you to contact us, and so we can track that down. But I do expect that based on the stats, most of you have completed the verification process, and that's really the focus of our webinar today. So let's talk a little bit about, Viveka mentioned earlier, the expenses related with a .bank website. Hopefully these are not a surprise to many of you, since you most likely already have a website. But we thought it would be useful to summarize the primary buckets of money involved in having a .bank website. You've already paid for the domain name itself. And if you're coming in through the ICBA, you paid around $900 for that. The DNS hosting service from Encirca is $200 a year. You are, of course, free to use any DNS provider that you wish. The SSL digital certificate is about $700 a year. Most of you are already using an extended validation cert for your existing website, so again, this should be no surprise to you. The DMARC service that Rob explained earlier, you can certainly do DMARC alignment on your own, and of course use your own resources for that. Encirca and ReturnPath have come up with a special package for community banks that were priced at $1,500. To give you a perspective on this price, the major banks in the world typically pay upwards of $75,000 a year to get into DMARC alignment. And so this is the first time that community banks have seen this type of pricing for help with DMARC. And then, of course, you need to host your website, which I assume you're doing today. And finally, you might need to do some redesign of your website, come up with a new logo to reflect the fact that now ends in .bank versus .com, and change your signage and stationery and so forth. And so those are the major expenses that, if you haven't thought about it, you certainly should put placeholders in for. So on the next slide, we talk about the activation process. Again, we want to emphasize that you're under no pressure to activate your .bank domain name. It is not required that you start using it right away. And so you can continue to use your existing website indefinitely. When you do decide to activate your .bank domain name, it must use SSL. And so we do see many banks with a desire to redirect their .bank domain name to their existing website. Keep in mind that if that does not have SSL on the .bank side, it is not in compliance with the .bank requirements. And so, the .bank registry is already sending out non-compliance notices for those folks who are forwarding without SSL. You can certainly migrate your website and email in parallel or independently of each other. We are suggesting that DMARC is a good idea, even if you don't plan to migrate to .bank. And so if you're not currently in DMARC alignment on your .com website, we can help you get into alignment there and make sure there's no spoofing happening with your .com. So on the next slide, I want to first address the way we're going to help our customers activate their name. If your name has been already validated by Symantec, we probably have already set you up on the DNS. And so our offer all along has been we will not charge any setup fee for standing up the required DNS for .bank. And in fact, not only is the setup for free, but we're offering a free trial for that as well. And so the way we've achieved that to comply with .bank is that we've created Verity DNS name servers using your domain name. And so if your name is rockport.bank, your name servers are ns1.rockport.bank and ns2.rockport.bank. So that's requirement number one from the registry, that your name servers end with .bank. Requirement number two is you need to have DNSSEC enabled on your domain name, and so that setup is done as well. Requirement number three is you must have a DMARC record set on your domain name with a default equal to reject, as Rob explained earlier. And that means that you're not yet using that name to send out email. Make sure you go through the DMARC process before you start sending out email, because if you have not identified all the authorized email senders for your domain name, the email will not get delivered. And then finally, of course, you need to have SSL on that domain name as well. So do not do web forwarding on your name without first making sure you have a digital certificate for your .bank domain name. So if you want to check status in terms of whether or not you've completed verification and whether or not DNSSEC has been set up correctly, we've provided links on that page. Remember, all these slides you can download from Encirca's ICBA website. But this is the typical landing page that we'll be providing for free for all of our customers. And it's maybe hard for you to see, but first of all, it will include a SSL certificate in order to stand up this landing page. So part pages like this also require SSL, just as web forwarding do. And furthermore, not only is SSL required, but .bank is recommending that when you redirect users from a .bank domain to a non-.bank domain, such as .com, you tell them that they're leaving the .bank zone. And so we have here, as part of our landing page, a button that says, future home of bank1.bank, which is a hypothetical bank. Click here to visit our existing website, which will go to your .com website, but it will first do a pop-up to alert the user that they are leaving .bank and going somewhere else. So in terms of an update on that, the DNS is completed for virtually everyone who has completed the verification process. The SSL certificate that we're going to include as part of this free trial is actually being rolled out as we speak. It is going to be what we call a domain validated certificate, which it meets the .bank requirements. It is not the extended validation certificate that is the standard for the banking industry, but it's something we're using for the trial, and we have a special discount we've negotiated with Symantec, so that if you wanted to upgrade that to an extended validation cert, we'll be able to give you some special pricing for that. Next slide, Andrew.
Actually, Tom, do you mind if I interrupt you for a couple questions?
Go for it.
So if a bank plans on forwarding their .com to a .bank site, is the SSL still required on both sites?
So .bank always requires SSL. The only exception is if you are forwarding from one .bank to another .bank. So in your question, your .com does not need SSL, but your .bank does. So as long as your .bank has SSL, you do not need it for your .com.
Okay, and to flip it, the .bank going to a .com, is it required to alert the end visitor that they are leaving a .bank site?
So it is not required, and so but it is recommended by the .bank registry. And what they're doing is they plan to issue an advisory by the end of October, clarifying their recommendations in terms of redirection from .bank to other websites. So as a matter of best practice, on this landing page that you're seeing here, we do plan to display a pop-up. It basically will add it'll require one more mouse click for an end user to go from a .bank name to an existing website. So we think that one additional mouse click will make certainly be compliant with what .bank recommends for best practice.
Thank you. And I have two questions on DNS as well. For starters, how will a bank be alerted of their DNS trial and when the trial period is expired?
All right, well, that's a great question. So our original plan was to offer a 3-month trial of the DNS. Now, since the names are not yet resolving yet because of the delays in the SSL cert, we do plan to extend that trial. So officially, the trial has not yet started, even though your DNS has already been set up. And so we're looking at probably starting the clock by no later than October 1st for the start of that trial. If you want to suspend that trial and have us do it for you later, that's fine. We can do that. But certainly the clock has not yet started yet. So for some of you who had the DNS set up a month ago, you will get an extra month or two on that trial. But we will certainly send out an email to alert you when that trial begins.
And one final question before we move on to the next slide. Do DNS name servers have to have a .bank vanity server, or can they be a .com DNS server?
They must have .bank for the base domain name. So there's really only two ways to accomplish this particular requirement. The way we have done it, which is using the bank's own .bank domain name, we have created those vanity name servers. And by the way, some folks charge $1,000 just to create vanity name servers. So as I mentioned earlier, we're doing that setup at no cost. There is a second way of doing it, which is if you can find a .bank eligible service provider, they might be willing to host your .bank domain name on their name servers. My understanding is of the nearly 6,000 .bank domain names, there are about a dozen that might qualify in that category. I don't have the list, but there are maybe about a dozen service providers that might be willing to host your DNS. Again, I don't know what they charge to do the DNS hosting. Feel free to shop around if you'd like. You have the price point that we're charging, which is $200 a year with no setup fee, and you can do some price comparison with the other folks.
Great, thank you. And one final one. Can a .bank host their own DNS?
Absolutely. And so if you've got the resources yourself, you can certainly host your own DNS. As I've explained here, that the DNS requirements are the ability to have the vanity name servers, so that the name servers end in .bank. You need to be able to do DNSSEC, and DNSSEC involves two steps. One is to generate the DNSSEC digital key, which is put into the name server itself for the domain name. And then you need to go to your registrar, so in this case, come to Encirca, and we need to update the registry with your DNSSEC key. So obviously, Encirca is both the DNS provider and the registrar can offer a streamlined process there. But if you do your own DNS hosting or use some other third-party DNS hosting, you'll still need to come to Encirca to complete that DNSSEC process.
Great, thank you. And we'll proceed to the next slide if that's okay.
Sure. So next I wanted to talk a little bit about DMARC, since Rob explained that in fairly technical detail. We've described three different ways how you might achieve your DMARC alignment, and this applies for both .bank and .com. You can certainly do DMARC yourself, and so when we did our setup for all the DNS, we put in a default DMARC record, and there are some different parameters for that. One of them is reject, as Rob explained earlier, saying this email domain is not being used to send out email, but we also specify certain email addresses that will be the recipient of various reports coming from the email providers like Google, Yahoo, AOL. Those reports are fairly cryptic. They're in XML format, but if you have someone who wants to take a look at those and try to interpret those, you can certainly do it yourself. We've actually taken a look at it ourselves and quickly realized that we could use some more expertise there. And so Return Path is the party who's the expert when it comes to analyzing these XML reports that come from Yahoo and so forth, and formatting that into a readable report that you can make sense of. And so you can subscribe to that monitoring and reporting service that Rob explained earlier. As I said, the fee for that is $1,500 up to the first year, and that allows you to basically hire an expert to make sure that you set up your SPF record correctly, and also they can assist with the DKIM record as well. And then finally, if you want to outsource all of it and just have someone else not only generate the reports but figure out what your SPF record should look like, then we have a corresponding service that we can offer you from ReturnPath as well. As the point I made earlier, even if you're not ready to migrate to .bank, we can help you get into DMARC alignment today for your .com website and email. And there are some links here if you want to find out, for example, are you using DMARC today on .com? Do you have an SPF or DKIM record? Is it set up correctly? So there's some great industry links here that we're showing on the page that you might find useful. So finally, in terms of what our package is for DMARC, as I explained to you, it covers that $1,500 a year would cover both .com and .bank. So even if you're not ready to migrate, we can get you into DMARC alignment for your .com website as well. So that's our webinar for today. I'm going to hand this back to Andrew and see if there are any other questions.
Thank you, Tom. We have a few general questions regarding what you just covered on SSL certificates. What is the recommended path for a bank to obtain one?
So Encirca certainly is offering SSL certificates, and we have, as you know, the minimum requirement for .bank is SSL. They don't require what type you get, and so the low end are called domain validated certs, and those are certainly would comply with the .bank requirement. However, the industry standard are called extended validation certs, and that provides the green bar up in the browser. And our research shows that over 90% of the banking industry does use extended validation certs. So our recommendation is that you do use EV certs. There are different flavors. For example, we offer all of them from Symantec, GeoTrust, Thought, Komodo. We do recommend either a GeoTrust or Symantec. You can get a cert just for your one .bank domain name. You also can get a cert that covers both .bank and .com. So again, if you want to contact us, we can help you with the different options there and help you get online with SSL.
Thank you. And could you give us a sense of just the overall adoption rate? Do you see many banks switching to use their .bank domain name or their .bank email address?
We're on the phone every day with banks who are switching. The best way for you to see how many .bank domain names have been activated is by doing a Google search. And what you do in Google, if you bring up your Google browser, you just type in the word site, S-I-T-E, colon, and then the word .bank, so period, B-A-N-K. And that will bring back all of the .bank web pages that Google has already indexed. And you'll see there's hundreds of .bank websites already out there that are resolving in the search engine.
Thank you. And regarding DMARC, is that automatically set up once a .bank name is approved?
Yeah, so in terms of our DNS setup, we automatically add a fully compliant DMARC record. And so if you're using Encirca for DNS, we've automatically set that up. The default is set to reject, and so when you're ready to migrate your email over to .bank, as Rob explained, you change that setting from reject to none. And that basically says, let all the email go through. We're not going to block any of this stuff. And that lets you spend the weeks or months to make sure that you have identified all of the authorized email senders of outgoing email for your .bank domain name. And once you've locked that down into an SPF record, you then change that setting back to reject so that only the authorized email gets delivered for your .bank name.
Thank you. And you mentioned earlier we had a list of expenses for a .bank domain name. Do services such as DNS and DMARC, can they accommodate more than one .bank name for the same price?
That's a good question. So we do have discounts if you want to use multiple domain names. So, for example, you all probably have an existing website with .com. You can move the DNS for your .com over to your name servers for .bank, and we do offer special pricing for that. DMARC similarly also has a special pricing if you want to have multiple domain names under that DMARC package.
Thank you. And the price for the DMARC service of about $1,500 annual fee, does that also include monitor and reporting?
Yes, Rob, do you want to talk to that a little bit? I don't know if Rob is
yeah,
back.
Yeah, I am on. Can you hear me okay, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, yes, absolutely. There are the two elements of DMARC that I described earlier. One is the control, and then the other was the visibility. So the blocking and the reporting, and both are included in the solution. Yes.
Thank you. In terms of migrating to a .bank site, is it recommended to migrate the email first or the website first?
So we have clients doing it in all different methods. The website migration, assuming you don't need to do any user interface changes or logo changes, it's actually fairly straightforward. It's not that complicated. The email migration could be complicated because depending on how many emails you're sending out and how many different systems send out your email. And so I don't want to, you can certainly migrate your .bank website and then figure out the email migration. It might be confusing to your clients to see a .bank website but receive email from a .com, so we certainly don't suggest you live in that sort of situation for too long. And so we certainly, I'm of the mind that you get your email house in order and get that squared away. I think if you're achieving DMARC in your .com, then the email migration is fairly straightforward because you've already got your DMARC and SPF figured out. And so that's why we've made sure that in our DMARC package it includes both .bank and .com so that you can get that done and make sure you're satisfied you'll be able to send out email, and then you can migrate your website.
Thank you. Now, regarding a more high level of the verification process, how can a bank tell if they've completed their verification process? And if they have not, what should they do?
So if you go to register.bank, which is the registry website, you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's a link called Who Is. And on that Who Is page, type in your domain name. And if you see a status equals pending create, you have not yet completed the verification process. So that's the easiest way to check. You do not want to see pending create. It should say active or no status at all. But if you see a pending create in your Who Is record, you need to contact Encirca, and so we can follow up and find out what the holdup is.
And will Encirca be providing a checklist of items that are required to complete their .bank website so that they are in compliance?
Yeah. So obviously, with our DNS setup, we are satisfying several items at once. So that's why we're trying to make it so easy. We're giving the setup for free, giving you the free trial, so that you know that you've satisfied the DNS requirements for .bank. Again, we're also providing the SSL as part of that package to make sure you satisfy the SSL requirement. I can tell you one other area that we're seeing the registry calling out .bank websites for non-compliance has to do with web hosting. And the issue there is that the registry has hired a monitoring service to make sure that the .bank website is in compliance. And so they will check, for example, is DNSSEC correctly configured, is DMARC correctly configured, does it have SSL? It is also checking what are called all the ports for the web server and making sure that you don't have certain ports unnecessarily open. It would also make sure that you are using the most current encryption, what are called cipher suites. And so if it finds that you're using any encryption that they prohibit, it will flag you for non-compliance. And so you'll have to then go to whoever's running your website for .bank and to have them fix those particular issues. But to answer the question, we can certainly provide a checklist as well for the most common issues that we're seeing.
Thank you. And we have two technical DMARC questions. The first would be, how does setting DMARC to quarantine affect mail that is received and cannot be verified?
Want to take that, Rob?
Okay, can you hear me okay? Sorry, I was on mute.
Yes, yeah, we can hear you, Rob.
Tom, yeah, sorry, Andrew, could you just repeat that? Didn't quite hear it.
Sure. So how is received mail that cannot be verified affected by setting DMARC to quarantine?
Email that cannot be verified. If it's received by a mailbox provider that doesn't support DMARC, then the email will just get delivered based on reputation and heuristics, so the content of the email. But you know, DMARC works, so we're not really aware of situations where, for example, Gmail were unable to verify with DMARC. It's a well-established protocol. There's redundancies in it, set in it. What I would say is that from time to time there are latency issues in the DNS. That means that, for example, an SPF lookup may not work. Those use cases are very, very marginal. They do happen, but they're marginal. If it does happen, then the email will pass through additional layers of filtering. So the way that Gmail filters email is it first of all establishes that the sender is who they say they are. It then asks the question, do I trust this sender? And then finally, it asks the question, do I trust this email? So just because DMARC, if DMARC were not there, then the email will still get verified based on reputation and other content related filters. I hope that's sufficiently detailed.
Yep, absolutely. As one final question, this is regarding to Symantec's mail servers. They request an SPF record for their mail service, but it can't be a .com for any DNS record that utilizes .bank, correct? So how do you recommend a bank manages a list of all the SPF records required by Symantec?
Yeah, so and I promise I won't get technical here, but in SPF records you can essentially reference other records. It's called an include, and so you essentially have your SPF record in .bank, and you reference other records, and you can reference other zones, other domain names. So yeah, there's a technical way of doing it.
Okay, so it'd be possible to reference, for example, a wildcard for a company that has rotating IP addresses?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what an SPF record is. You can specify either designated or ranges of IP addresses. So specific IP addresses or ranges. Yeah, no problem at all. And you can also then reference other zones as well, other DNS records. So yeah, no problem with that at all.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That will conclude our webinar. I'd like to thank all the attendees for joining us today. I'd like to thank the presenters, Rob Holmes, Tom Barrett, and Viveka Ware. In terms of next steps to start the planning process for migration, please check out .bank's planning guide at register.bank/guide. If you are ready to move forward with DNS and DMARC, please sign up at encirca.com/ICBA. And all general inquiries and callback requests, please request via email found at icba@encirca.com. Thank you everyone for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you all.